In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest NHL trade rumors from around the league. We're looking at the New York Rangers, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Calgary Flames, and the Ottawa Senators. We also have news from the NHL waiver wire, and in some other news, the Carolina Hurricanes continue to troll the Montreal Canadiens pretty hardcore on social media. We're going to take a look at that as well, coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. First up, let's take a look at the news from the NHL waiver wire. We had another claim today. The Tampa Bay Lightning have reclaimed Alex Barré-Boulet, who was recently claimed not that long ago by the Seattle Kraken from Tampa. He played 2 games with them, put up 1 assist, and then they put him back on waivers. I believe it's likely due to a roster spot being needed because they activated Calle Jarnkrok at the same time. So Barré-Boulet goes back to Tampa. They get him back. He was only gone for like a week or whatever it was. Interesting to see why they would do that, or why Seattle would actually, only keep him such short term. But that does happen sometimes around the NHL. New on waivers today, we also have young defenseman Colton White, who I believe is 24 now with New Jersey. He's been placed on waivers. He hasn't played a whole lot this year. I believe he's gotten into 2 games, limited playing time, and they're probably trying to see if they can either assign him to their minor league team, get more of a role, or see if they can get him a fresh start somewhere else. Now, on the injury front, we had a pretty substantial injury to Ducks forward Max Jones, who apparently is going to be out for a minimum of 4, likely closer to 5 or 6 months from a torn pectoral muscle or tendon. Sounds like a pretty severe injury. Going to keep him out long term, so that's certainly not great. I know a lot of the, I guess you can't really call them prospects anymore, but younger players in the Ducks organization, like Jones and Steele and Terry and Comtois, who've been around for a few years now. I know they seem to be a little bit disappointed in the progress that they've made and the roles that they've played. So that's not going to help matters any being out such a long-term basis. But there's lots of young talent there in Anaheim trying to grab roster spots and get more playing time and bigger roles, etc. So that will create an opportunity for somebody else. So we'll see where things go when it comes to the Ducks and the Jones void that he'll leave in the lineup. Now, when it comes to some other news here I want to talk about as well, as we know, the Carolina Hurricanes and the Montreal Canadiens have been building on a bit of a rivalry ever since the Habs did the offer sheet to Sebastian Aho a couple seasons back. Things have gotten pretty personal between the two teams, and even though a lot of times when you ask either side in different interviews or media, nobody seems to want to admit it, that it's not like revenge tactics, that it's not personal, but you gotta think it is at this point. Like, I mean, they need to, knock it off and just admit it, that, they really don't like each other. The Carolina Hurricanes have been trolling the Habs pretty hardcore. They did it, which we talked about before, after the Kotkaniemi offer sheet, which turned out to be successful. And of course, last night was the first meeting between the two teams on the ice this year. Kotkaniemi scored his first goal as a Cane in the Bell Center against the Habs, and they really went all out on Twitter. I'm going to show you a few snapshots here from their Twitter account. Really giving it to Montreal. And it seems like from listening to different NHL reporters, I know Elliotte Friedman on his podcast that came out today made mention that he's asked around to kind of see what other teams and executives and hockey people around the league think of this rivalry and what Carolina's been kind of doing and troll-wise. And he seems it's pretty split. There's about 50% of people think they should just knock it off and they don't like it, and there's about the other 50% who kind of enjoy it. They think it's entertaining, it's building a rivalry, and as much as this is a sport, like in a lot of times, and when it comes to competitive anything, you need sometimes to have some heels and some fan favorites. And even though the Canes for the longest time have been kind of that goofy group of guys calling themselves the Jerks and all that, like they were, a team that a lot of people were pulling for and cheering for, they're kind of slowly, drifting towards being the heel, like, if you want to use some wrestling terminology there. Like, for example, they put this out on Twitter last night, trolling the Habs. They created a website, actually. They went that far with it, and it's called didthehabslose.com. They tweeted out the link, and if you click on the link, it's an actual site. There's not a ton of stuff there, but still, like, it's, pretty crazy that they went that far to actually, it's not a very in-depth website or anything, but still, they've taken some time to do this. Another Twitter post says here, after the Hurricanes defeated the Canadiens, it says, Les Hurricanes triomphant. So, like, obviously the Hurricanes won. They've been, speaking French on their account. They did this before, after the Kotkaniemi offer sheet was successful. Of course, the other thing, too, that they put out is they put on a post with the final score, and they said, we're reporting the score to the league. And that was another shot at Montreal, because as we talked about, and this just confirms here that it was true, there were reports, I believe it might have been Frank Saravelli that made it known, that the Montreal Canadiens reported the Carolina Hurricanes to the NHL because they did not play enough preseason games. There's a requirement in the NHL for all teams to participate in at least 6 preseason NHL games, and they only did 4. And really, if you look through the rule book, and I think through the CBA, like, there really isn't a punishment, not that anybody could find, but that's what they're expected to do, and they didn't do it, so Montreal reported them, and turned out later that the Carolina Hurricanes had already talked to the league about it, and they had some reasons, and the NHL granted them an exception, so they weren't actually breaking any rules, just nobody knew. They didn't make anything public because they really didn't need to, right? So, of course, they're trolling them for doing that. Of course, they had another post here saying, offering the stats sheet for y'all. So, obviously, play on words there, offer sheet. And another post saying to everybody to have a good night. Like, they just won't let up. They are hardcore trolling Montreal. And you can't say that between Tom Dundon, especially, who's been reportedly being heavily involved with that offer sheet, is really took things personal when Montreal targeted Aho for that offer sheet, because they came out and said that they didn't think Carolina would match the structure of the contract because they front loaded it with a lot of signing bonuses, and Dundon has a reputation for being frugal, I guess we could say, to be polite, and a lot of people didn't think that they would do it because they would not be fond of the bonuses, but they did end up matching it, and they didn't, really seem to regret it at this point. Of course, Aho is a great player for them, a big part of their team. It would have been a major loss to lose him, and, to be honest, I really don't think that the Canadiens really went high enough to really push them to lose and not match the offer sheet. And as much as Aho did sign it, so obviously part of him was willing to accept the chance that he could become a Montreal Canadien, I don't really think at the end of the day he expected that to happen. I think he mainly signed it just to get his contract over with, to get the Carolina Hurricanes to match, so that he was done early in the offseason and didn't have to worry about it anymore. So it worked out in his favor. He get to stay with his team, and away we go. But it's just, I don't know, to a degree, it's comical to watch this rivalry build. But I know not everybody's enjoying it, so I'd love to know what everybody else thinks on this topic here down in the comments. Let me know. I'm not sure if you've been following along on Twitter, but the Carolina Hurricanes Twitter account is certainly one of the more controversial yet entertaining, I think, Twitter follows amongst NHL teams. Most of the other teams' social media managers do not post a lot of the stuff that they do, so I highly recommend you check it out if you use Twitter, if you're on there. Of course, as we want to talk about some NHL trade talk today as well. We have a variety of players we want to look at. First up, the Ottawa Senators has been reported through TSN Insider Trading, also been mentioned by Elliot Friedman. It's pretty well known around the league that they're looking for a couple of players, and obviously with the Shane Pinto injury last night, that just really puts the pressure on Pierre Dorion to be working the phones. They're already a little bit thin down the middle, and then Pinto had a, I guess I wouldn't call it a dirty hit. It was an unfortunate tie-up with Sharks defenseman Muriel Ferrero. He went really hard into the end boards. You could tell his shoulder was hurt pretty bad. Got off the ice, right down the tunnel. He tried to come back, but him actually playing is what kind of caused that second goal, which ended up being the winning goal, because he really didn't have the strength he could put into that arm. And he really shouldn't have been out there, but you know what? Sometimes what players get like, they think they can play through it, and sometimes the team really should do more to stop them. I'm not sure how that all came to be, but clearly once he went to make that play, you could tell he had no business being out there, and he should be off getting medical attention. But it is what it is. So he's, unfortunately, according to DJ Smith, not going to be out too long. There's no structural damage. So it might only be like a week, maybe like 10 days. Like, it may not be too bad. We'll see how things go. But like I said, there was already talk of them maybe wanting to add another veteran center iceman. Colin White's another guy who could play center, out for several months as well with a bad injury. So they're thin down the middle, and they was already talking about maybe wanting to add a top 9 winger as well. So they picked up Zach Sanford earlier. Of course, they have Tyler Ennis on a short-term deal. but they still could use one more player so they can keep some more of their guys down in the minors. I mean, Sokolov would be the main player, really, I think, who could come up and make a difference, but I think they want a little bit more experience there if they're going to have any chance at making a push to try to contend for playoffs this year. So obviously there's a lot of talk about maybe Dylan Strome. We know he's available in Chicago. They've made that abundantly clear that he's, potentially out there, but we don't really know for sure who else that the Senators are targeting or talking to. There's a variety of players that are out there available on short-term deals that, there's not a lot of risk, but they could end up using defenseman Erik Brannstrom, unfortunately, as a trade chip if they feel the need to get this done. At the same time, they do have lots of draft currency. They may not necessarily move Brannstrom, but if they do take anybody that's active with them right now, he would probably be one of the first to go. Unfortunately, I know there's a mixed opinion out there in Sens world about his usage and development and all that, but we'll see where things go in Ottawa, but certainly wouldn't be shocking at all in the next even few days or week if they do pick up at least one, maybe even two players. If somebody happens to go on waivers that looks interesting, they could even go that route as well. Now, when it comes to Dylan Strome, though, there's also interest from the New York Rangers side, according to Larry Brooks of the New York Post. He reported on that earlier, saying, of course, the Rangers, who also have his brother Ryan Strome as their number 2 center, are interested in bringing in Dylan to maybe work a little bit down the lineup, maybe in that number 3 spot or something. Either way, they'd like to add another depth piece in that regards. He's only got 1 year on his contract. That's not a ton of money. A lot of people assume that maybe if they make a deal for a guy like Strome, Kraftstoff would be the guy to go. I would pump the brakes on that. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I know based on what I've seen from Larry Brooks and other NHL reporters, it sounds like Drury's really going to take his time with Kraftstoff, and I don't think Dylan Strome would be the piece they're looking to get back in that kind of deal. I think they'd be more likely to go, or at least to offer and see if they could work in a guy like Libor Hayek. There's already been talk about him being in a package to go out for something else because they're trying to get him more of a role. And obviously they have lots of other young defensemen that can work in there to kind of do a similar role, like a Zach Jones, for example. They still got Braden Schneider on the way. Of course, Nils Lundqvist is getting a look this year. So there's lots of young talent there who can step in and play a similar role. And that, to me, would make more sense if they're going to do a deal, that would be the kind of trade that they try to do. I don't know exactly what Stan Bowman in Chicago is going to be looking for when it comes to Dylan Strome, but I wouldn't think the price tag is going to be too high. Of course, he was scratched for the first 4 games, finally get himself into the lineup, and we'll see where things go from here. But he's certainly, with the teams out there needing a centerman, and he's not really playing, I'm going to assume that they were holding him out maybe for asset management, even though they wouldn't say it publicly, and now maybe they're trying to showcase him and try to build up some value to see what they can't get in a return. Now, the other option I want to look at here tonight for trade talk is Calgary. Now, there's no guarantee, of course, that they trade winger Johnny Gaudreau, but there's still pretty much radio silence on between the Flames and him, as far as anybody knows at least, regarding contract extension talks. But they both made it abundantly clear at the start of the season that they were not going to be getting really talking with the media, or also, if they're doing a good job in-house at locking it down and not letting any information leak out, then that explains why we haven't been hearing anything. It doesn't necessarily mean that no talks are happening, but nobody can verify that they are either, so it's difficult to say. But I know dailyfaceoff.com, who's really expanded their team lately, have a former executive on their team now who had a lot of experience handling contracts. And based on his opinion of what he knows of Johnny Gaudreau, based on what they've heard from behind the scenes through different agencies and stuff, of what he could be looking for and what he feels his worth would be, they're estimating that it's going to take Calgary probably an 8-year deal in order to keep the winger in the Flames organization. It makes sense. I mean, he's going to be looking for max term here. He's 28 years old. This is really his last chance to really cash in if he can get himself a 7 or 8 year deal. That'll take him into his mid-30s or slightly beyond 35, depending on exactly how many years he does. So this is like his big chance right now. So whether that be in Calgary or somebody else, they're going to get that done. Of course, Calgary is the only team that can give him the 8th year, so that does add a little bit of incentive for him to stay, and he said all the right things about staying, so we will see. I think a lot of this is also going to depend on the direction of the team. I mean, it's early in the season. They've played 3 games. They're 1-1-1. It's kind of hard to predict exactly what they are right now, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint what they're going to be. But if the Flames are not in it as the season goes on, and if contract talks are still either not happening much or they're kind of quiet, then I would think that the odds of a trade is certainly going to pick up, as I mentioned before, and there's certainly going to be a fair bit of teams interested. I would not be shocked to see teams like the Flyers or Jersey or any of those teams in the eastern part of the U.S. where he's from try to get involved and see if they can bring him home. But like I said, they can only give him a 7-year contract, whereas the Flames have that 8th year. But it's probably going to be in that $7.75 to $8 million range is likely what it's going to cost on a Gaudreau contract. If you look at the more recent 7x7 for Gabe Landeskog in Calgary, they're probably going to use that as a recent comparable, but Gaudreau has put up more points typically. Different style of game too, so it's not the perfect, absolute best comparable, but it's a starting point. And obviously, like I said, he's going to get a little bit more than that. But if you look at some of the other players getting like $9 million, he's probably not quite there either. So I'm thinking it's probably like an 8x8 would be what it would take roughly in that ballpark to get him to remain in Calgary Flames. So we'll see where things go and what the Flames direction they take here. It could be a good opportunity to lock him up and make him a huge part of the franchise for the future. They also have to do Matthew Tkachuk soon. This is the last year of that bridge contract he signed. And, of course, they can do the contract for him any time. Is he going to want to let it play out into the offseason, or is he going to want to get ahead of it? I don't know. I think a lot of that is going to depend on how the season is going for the team and himself. I wouldn't be surprised if he takes the wait-and-see approach, just like we saw with his brother Brady in Ottawa in that whole process that just recently got drug out and completed. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.